Nostalgia can be weird. This series was born of my desire to share lore on obscure fighting game characters from games I loved as a kid, but people rarely talk about in positive tones, usually for good reason. Along the way, I've also plumbed the depths of other notorious button bashers that escape the wide net of experience cast by frequent trips to the now extinct video rental stores and arcades, which is an essential pivot because the well is running dry. If I'm being generous with the definition, we have 6 more episodes coming over the next 2 years about fighting games I played when I was small, today's included. And today's doesn't have that much nostalgia for me because I'm pretty sure I only ever played it once or twice in my teens and on an emulator before tossing it in the bin. Oops! Allow me to set the foundation. I grew up in what a lot of folks think was a golden era of animation, much of which included anthropomorphic characters. Tiny Toons, DuckTales, Cats Don't Dance, Darkwing Duck, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Animaniacs, The Secret of Nim, A Goofy Movie, Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, Tasmania. Okay, maybe not Tasmania. I had reruns of the Thundercats, Looney Tunes, and the whole Hanna-Barbera catalog to supplement my interest in people-shaped animals, so you can see why my curiosity was piqued by the ads for today's subject. I'm Eric J. Chucky, and welcome to Violent Profiles, where we discuss obscure fighting games and the rosters that define them. If you want to prove you're definitely not a furry, how about you click that like button, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and leave a comment proclaiming so. All that stuff causes the show to reach more people, and golly, I'd just appreciate it. If you are a furry, do everything I just said while thinking about a Sparkledog. I'll know. Brutal PAWS of Fury was developed and published by GameTech on the Sega CD in 1994, and eventually ported to the Genesis, SNES, Amiga, CD32, and DOS, before getting that less talked about non-sequel Brutal Unleashed Above the Claw on the 32X in 1995. If it were released in the modern day, it would be more like a DLC expansion or final patch, and it would definitely be one the fans complained about. It adds 2 new characters, sure, but whether you prefer the visual overhaul or not is a matter of taste. I don't. And the game moves so much faster in a way that doesn't do it any favors, quite unlike fellow legendarily crappy fighter Shaq Fu. In fact, Brutal distances itself from Shaq Fu in a lot of ways, like actually being very bad. Shaq Fu had over-animated moves that sometimes felt odd to execute, which Brutal does have, but it also has under-animated ones with 1 frame that they slow down depending on how strong your strike is. Yeah, while most fighting games at the time had so many buttons and unique moves tied to each, despite the Brutal games having 6 attack buttons, they're all just the same move in decreasing speeds for increasing damage. Some of them lock you in a multi-hit combo instead, and almost all of them have abysmal hitboxes which aren't helped by the fact that the game has no chip damage. Your opponent can just sit there and block to their heart's content until you decide to shake up your strategy, and there aren't any cross-ups or throws either. You also don't begin play with access to special moves. For that, you need to progress through the story mode with your character of choice and beat the computer opponents who do have all their special moves. Then, every time you play in the future, you'll need to input a long, clunky password to use them in story or versus mode. I know it felt like we had more time on our hands in an era before social media, but even for the time, this was stupid. Combined with all the loading screens and superfluous versus screens, many of which are unskippable, it takes an age before you actually get to play. And even then, you know the part of these videos where I talk about which characters I like and which ones I hate? We're not doing that today. They're all bad. Some are less bad than others, and admittedly, I couldn't find functional codes on the internet for anyone to unlock all their moves, so I just didn't try them. I certainly didn't want to grind for them myself. This game made me upset to play. Even with everything else I just said, you might still be able to make a fun fighter out of it, but every button press felt gross and unwieldy. I put off this video for a whole month because I didn't want to capture footage for it. I'm not even going to say the show's signature catchphrase of, "That's a shame because there are some really good ideas here," cause there aren't. There's the skeleton of a good idea, that being the whole fighting game full of cartoon animal characters thing, but the execution is so bad. It's almost worse than Criticom. I mean, it probably isn't, but it makes me feel about as bad as I did while playing Criticom, and at least they have the excuse of a disastrous development cycle for their half-assed game.
But I'm using my wallet.
What we do have, and what I feel like was paid the most attention to, is the plot. It's derivative, even for a fighting game in the mid-90s, but it's there, and it's better than it could have been. Every 4 years, Dalai Lama, he's a llama, see, his name meets the absolute minimum bar to qualify as humor, hosts a tournament of the greatest fighters on his private island where he judges them for their martial prowess and warrior spirit before finally handing the winner the Belt of Heaven. Unless I failed my due diligence, and if I did, I don't care, there aren't any differences in the bios from PAWS of Fury to Above the Claw, so we're going to focus on the Sega CD version except for when we can't, because I prefer its graphics and gameplay. Let's get started with the Liu Kang of the crew, Kung Fu Bunny. Please note these characters' names may or may not have anything to do with their actual fighting style, and that I wouldn't consider anything that happens in this game a fighting style in the first place. Bunny employs the relaxed paw, which I guess could be a kind of kung fu if you squint. His manual art looks like a svelte jazz jackrabbit, but in-game he's more like the Lapin version of Slowpoke Rodriguez.
When do we eat?
This guy smokes a lot of pot and lives in his sweatpants is all I'm saying. We join Kung Fu Bunny at the monastery where memories of his master play within his mind. It is in the nature of things that all good must come from evil, and all evil must come from good. A white painting on white canvas is not a painting at all. Bunny had received an invitation the day before, and though he had renounced active combat in pursuit of peace, he could feel his heart burning for competition, and knew the monastery could use the money on offer to stay open. In his conflict, he saw two butterflies idly passing through, simply following their nature to fly and feed without burdening themselves with such dilemmas as he had. But in truth, that was his answer. It was in his nature to seek combat, and with some reluctance, he accepted he would never be free of his nature. A white painting is still a painting to the painter, Bunny said aloud and smiled. The butterflies ignored him and flew on. Hold up, that was actually deep. Is this still the terrible game with the titty fox? Well, it might not be any fun to play, but us character connoisseurs over here at Violent Profiles are eating good tonight. When you beat the game, you have more self-discipline than I could ever hope to achieve, and are treated to your character of choice doing katas aboard an old-timey ship while the text crawl reveals their ultimate fate. Kung Fu Bunny surges with pride as he observes his fallen foes, the belt of heaven tight around his waist. Two seagulls flew above him, and he joined in their laughter-like cries, stripping himself of the belt and tossing it into the ocean. Pride was the refuge of fools. Overhead, the seagulls flew on, ignoring him. 1,000 miles away, a pair of butterflies did the same. Oh my granny goodness, that's cool! Is it worth slogging through the game for? Hell no. But I feel pretty good about downloading the PDF of the manual and hitting up the video game museum for the ending. Each character bio also includes the path of wisdom the character follows, kind of like a virtue they embody. Kung Fu Bunny's is understanding, which I would say is accurate. They also include suggestions for who might want to play this character, though this has nothing to do with their gameplay or anything. For example, it says if you're kind and considerate and sort of a people pleaser, you might want to play Kung Fu Bunny. Tai Cheetah explicitly practices Tai Chi, which I suppose allows him to manifest flames on his body, and he embodies the path of mindfulness. He's the teacher of Kendo Coyote, an impudent and rash martial artist who occupies Tai Cheetah's thoughts to this day. He remembers one such lesson Kendo refused to learn. He held up a pillow and instructed that in softness is always strength. Your paw may break the thickest wood or strongest brick, but you cannot break a pillow. The stubborn coyote then drew his blade and sliced the pillow in half.
What's the sound of one hand clapping? Piece of cake.
Win the tournament with Tai, and he also tosses the belt aside, pleased to have seen everyone again and eager to return to his family. Those who play Tai Cheetah are devoted to their friends, but harbor no sympathy for their foes, and have watched those they fostered to success fall to ruin by their own misdeeds. I'm sure that describes a lot of the 9-year-olds playing this game in 1994. It certainly describes Tai Cheetah. He received an invite to the tournament, but having previously participated and found success, as well as finding success in personal, spiritual, and material aspects of life, he was disinclined to return, except that he knew he would find his pupil there, and had to answer the question of what became of him. What indeed? Kendo Coyote's backstory is more dialogue-heavy than the ones we've explored so far. He's the Johnny Cage of the brutal world, though Johnny himself has more respect for his discipline than Kendo does. We join him out of shape, shilling knockoff Frosted Flakes and arguing with his agent over the next big score. If he follows up on that tournament invite and obtains the Belt of Heaven, surely he could parlay his victory into a lucrative movie deal. This would mean he'd need to get back into shape, but the Coyote is willing to make sacrifices for stardom and success. A couple of notes on Kendo's bio here. Apparently in the world of Brutal, successful commercial actors can readily afford private catering featuring caviar and champagne. Also, his agent's name is James, and not like Business Bobcat or Let's Do Lunch Lizard or Jimmy. There's a story in there, the implication of something that this guy insists on going by James. Anyhow, Kendo practices Kenjutsu. Please ignore the fact that he never uses a sword. The distinction between using this style and his namesake informs us more about his personality, however. Kendo, the Japanese martial art, is focused on training with wooden swords and protective gear, sort of how like Westerners view fencing as a collegiate sport, versus Kenjutsu, which is the practical application of sword fighting in live warfare. It's about practicing kata intended to kill, whereas the art of kendo is about sport. Kenjutsu is exclusive to the elite, whereas kendo is generally considered open to the public. Add this to the Who Plays Kendo Coyote segment boiling down to someone from Cobra Kai, and you get the full picture that he is a man who has fallen from grace. Impatience and glory have cheapened his studies. He's described as walking the path of resolve, but a better word might be ambition. Blind ambition with no regard for what he might need to destroy on the way to the top. Let's switch gears to Ivan Bear. Like James Agent, he has a regular man name, but for those of you who didn't grow up in the era, it's also like a generalized stereotype for Russian people. Like if the Russian government was up to something, you'd say, "Old Ivan is up to his tricks again." I feel stupid for explaining this. Do we still do that? I mean, some folks probably do, but like as a whole, I feel like that's not a thing anymore. Anyhow, despite his similarities to Zangief from Street Fighter, Ivan is just a heavy hitter described as practicing the Soviet military's pet martial art, Sistema, though he only does so in the loosest sense. Which is true of all the characters in this game, but for Ivan it's canon. A former 3-time hand-to-hand champion during his military service, Ivan moved on to the construction industry and thought the competitive fighting part of his life was over until he received Dalai Lama's invitation. So he hopped a train as the first step on his journey to the island, nudging and disturbing the other passengers as he attempted to fit into the undersized seats. I appreciate some of the softness they give Ivan here, especially so soon after the end of the Cold War. He's belligerent, but the manual mentions his longing for purpose and warm enthusiasm over being invited. If you beat the game with him, Ivan finds himself instilled with new hope after winning the Belt of Heaven. If he succeeds in one martial arts tournament, he could succeed in others. Those who play Ivan are down to earth and solve their problems with determination and hard work. They hate wasting time, and thus Ivan and his players embody the path of action. I have to say Prince Leon the Lion is not the character I expected him to be. At first glance, I thought we were going to get an artist formerly known as parody with his rock star status, name, and general vibe, but no. Despite his place of honor as a Prince of Africa and success as a musician, he harbors hatred for Kendo Coyote and Tai Cheetah, who he feels have slighted him in the past. Leon only joins the tournament to seek revenge against them, but...
Oh, a friend of mine, he always says, revenge is a fool's game.
Even if he succeeds, he understands now that his purpose is not to seek redemption, but to defend his crown. A crown which, deprived of the fire that once stoked in his soul, he could now lose. Well, loose. There are some pretty unfortunate typos in Leon's ending crawl.
Shall I give you despair?
Leon embodies the path of effort, which doesn't make much sense to be exclusive to him. They're all dedicated fighters who had to put a lot of work into their craft. He also practices Tanku, the Iron Rage, which isn't a real thing. Those who play Leon never forget a debt, whether it was a favor done for them or a slight against them. They have indomitable will, but lack the ability to focus on more than one thing at a time. These guides would have been cool if they were more like descriptive of the character's fighting styles, like you might enjoy Leon if you prefer to keep your enemies at arm's length until it's time to strike or something. But then I suppose there would have had to have been effort put into the game's mechanics for that to be relevant. Alright, we're halfway through this. Let's get to the reason you're all here. Foxy Roxy is not this character's name. It's Indra Prashmet. The story, in fact, never refers to her by Foxy Roxy, nor does it explain the moniker. She's the president of the United Nations Children's Fund, an orphan who grew up in a UN hospital and dedicated much of her youthful passion to mastering Penjak Silat. Following the path of livelihood, her goals are more about helping others, but much like those who play as her, she struggles to take things seriously and is easily distracted. Today, her distraction was an invitation to the tournament from the man she admired most, Dalai Lama. Indra had dreams of holding the Belt of Heaven, and should you help her realize those dreams, she will donate the prize money to those in need, and her efforts would turn to bridging the gap between the rich and the poor and cultivating respect for all cultures. Her greatest battle would not be against the various martial arts masters across the globe, but in fostering togetherness, which I feel is a little cheapened in the face of her low kick animation. The final member of the vanilla PAWS of Fury roster is Ray Rat, a practitioner of Muay Thai who, despite walking the path of speech, is silent and stoic. Those who play Ray despise fools and wish to see them humiliated. They stand up to would-be oppressors, but find it difficult to make friends, especially with the ignorant. Very Blue Oni. Ray is good at what he does, making lots of money in the MMA circuit, but something about the prestige of Dalai Lama's tournament calls to him. If he wins, he permits himself a single smile. Aww. The Panther doesn't have a bio in the manual, and he's listed as a secret character, but he's right there on the select screen, so he can't be that secret. Maybe it's because he was omitted from the 16-bit versions of the game? The Panther is a brother within the order of monks called Kali Chaka, who practice Chin Na, a Chinese martial art of controlling the opponent's joints so they cannot move. Or maybe he's just an evil wizard. He's certainly not a panther. I don't know what that is. Tasmanian devil? He believes he is above good and evil, that the only truth is power. He follows the path of meditation, which has led him to believe that he deserves to be among the leaders of the world, just as his players do. He might be a reference to Chin Nen from Power Instinct, maybe not, but there are some similarities. Should he win the Belt of Heaven, he cackles to the sky and screams that his next fight will be against the heavens themselves. Let this be a lesson to you. People who say there is no such thing as good and evil are usually just selfish jerks trying to justify their shitty behavior. Brutal also has a proper secret character that requires a code to unlock, Karate Croc. He's literally just some dude who lives on Dalai Lama's island and is described as a street brawler who is fed up with simply being an observer for the tournament and wants to join. Dali does not approve of this, but I guess can't stop him for whatever reason. This tournament's rules seem looser than I initially believed. Players of Karate Croc are self-made. They take opportunities for victory while others are too busy contemplating their path to the top. The game describes the Croc as following the path of respect, but yeah, no, nothing about his bio suggests that. Beat the game with him and the Croc is just happy to have bested Dalai Lama, who he mocks and looks down upon while sailing off into the distance. Above the claw adds two more fighters, the first of which is Psycho Kitty. This is the most 90s mascot character looking mother lover in a game full of them. If you play Psycho Kitty, your heart walks the same path as his.
Love! I don't get enough of it.
He used to be a monk, but couldn't jive with the lifestyle and left to seek his own path. Our nameless cat friend, assuming his given name isn't Psycho, was just curious why all the people were heading to this island and decided to stow away on Dalai Lama's ship. When he found out they were fighting over a shiny belt, it became the object of his desire. Once he wins it, like any good cat, he immediately becomes bored of it and starts grooming. I'm gonna, I haven't really done this video. It's about time for me to overanalyze the game, right? Psycho Kitty acts more like a cat than his fellow fighters act like their animal analogs. We know from the other bios that mundane butterflies, seagulls, and fish exist, unless caviar is secretly high-octane nightmare fuel, and that our kitty here is considered psycho, which was the 90s talking about mental illness with their usual level of delicacy. Is Kitty considered insane because he's more in touch with his animal side? He still wears clothes sometimes, and there are Western boxing techniques in his combat style that the manual describes as catfight, but otherwise there isn't anything particularly psycho about him. Oh, you know what? I've just noticed the manual calls him Ficho Kitty, so my mistake, let's move along. Despite all appearances, Chung Po is not a mole. He's a dragon that awoke in the body of a mole and now seeks to stop the Dalai Lama before he becomes too powerful. On one hand, that's a shame. We praised Bloody Roar last year for having a cool ninja mole character. It would have been neat to see his predecessor. On the other hand, Chung Po has possibly the most interesting gimmick among the roster, with many of his special attacks being in mole form and the rest of his strikes in gangly dragon form. He practices the martial art of Sabal, which I'm pretty sure is the card game from Star Wars, and follows the path of power. Those who play know that true wisdom lies in the domination of others, so I guess I don't want to play with anyone who likes Chung Po. You sound mean. Win the game with him, and our Dragon Mole realizes his time on Earth is complete. He savors his victory before transcending to the next life. Finally, there's the boss of the game, Dalai Lama. A few inaccuracies and inconsistencies also come to a head here. See, most of the research I've done on this game says Dali is evil, and near as I can tell, he isn't. I'd see why someone would draw that conclusion based on his appearance in the cinematics and promotional materials, but the only people who oppose him expressly exploit the weak for power, and the virtuous Indra hold him in a deep regard. Speaking of Indra, the manual has Lama's visions of the various fighters on their way to his competition instead of an actual backstory, and this is the only place in story text where she's referred to as Foxy. So I wonder if that's Dali's nickname for her and why it appears in health bars and menus but not anywhere else. Somebody's got a crush. Dali has reached the pinnacle of skill, and his only dream is for someone to defeat him. That is why he arranges the tournament. Should he succeed, he mourns that he continues to walk the path of perfection, and hopes that in 4 years' time at the next tournament, someone will finally see him fall. I played Brutal Paws of Fury on a very real Sega CD that I definitely own, which has an option for a fun room. Within, you can listen to the game's music tracks, which are pretty boppin', as performed by a live band version of a few of the characters. There's also a couple minutes of quote-unquote outtakes, which present some bizarre goofiness before just showcasing a bunch of unused assets. I'll let it play through the outro here. So, alright. Brutal Paws of Fury and its sequel have zero going for them in the gameplay department, and despite some really nice graphics and decent tunes, the presentation overall makes me want to pull my hair out. Some of the narratives are actually really good. While not every character has the same pathos as Kung Fu Bunny and Dalai Lama, most of them are good enough by fighting game standards. It's a shame the passion put into the fluff wasn't met by the effort put into the mechanics. Does that mean the game got a raw deal? No. And I can't even say Rod Humble, the guy who seemingly crafted the world and its characters, didn't get his due. He's had a celebrated career, was a character in The Sims 2, and at time of writing, his studio Paradox Tectonic is scheduled to release a Sims competitor, Life by You, in early access in March of 2024. It might already be out by the time you're watching this. Go play it! Next time on Violent Profiles, talking about Chinen earlier made me kind of nostalgic. I wonder what's next for the Power Instinct franchise. Until then, if you hit up our Patreon at the $5 tier, like all the names currently on screen, your name will join them. And you'd have already watched the next episode because you get it a whole month early. How neat! Until next time, white out.